The stars looked peaceful through the bridge window of the HSS Defiant, but Captain Andrew Cole knew that peace never lasted long on the frontier. He had been commanding this frigate for 3 years now, patrolling the edges of human space where colonies struggled to survive and pirates sometimes raided supply ships. At 47 years old, Cole had seen enough combat to know when something felt wrong, and today everything felt wrong. The Defiant was not an impressive ship by military standards. She was old, her hull patched in a dozen places from previous battles, and her weapon systems were 2 generations behind the newest models. But Cole loved her anyway because she was reliable and his crew knew every inch of her. 85 men and women called this ship home, and Cole knew each of them by name. Lieutenant Lucy Grant sat at the tactical station, her young face focused on the sensor displays. She was 28 and brilliant, fresh from the academy where she had graduated top of her class. This was her first real assignment, and Cole could see she was nervous about not having real combat experience yet. He had faith in her, though, because her simulations were flawless, and her mind worked faster than anyone he had ever met. The mission today was simple and boring, which was exactly how Cole liked his missions. They were doing a routine patrol near Kelton's Gate, a mining colony that sat at the very edge of human territory. 40,000 people lived there, digging valuable minerals from asteroids and trying to build lives far from Earth. The colony had been there for 15 years now, and it was finally starting to feel permanent. Chief Engineer Peter Hayes called up from the engine room with his usual gruff voice. The old man was 53 and had been working on ships longer than Lucy had been alive. He complained constantly about the Defiant's age and how everything needed repairs, but somehow he always kept her running. Cole trusted Hayes more than anyone on the ship because the engineer had saved their lives more times than he could count. Dr. Helen Park was in the medical bay, conducting routine checkups on the crew. She was 34 and had joined the fleet because she wanted to help people on the frontier where medical care was scarce. Cole appreciated her calm presence because she kept the crew's morale high, even during long, boring patrols like this one. Ensign Kyle Bennett, the youngest member of the bridge crew at 22, monitored the communications station. He was eager and enthusiastic, always volunteering for extra duties and trying to prove himself. Cole saw a lot of his younger self in Bennett and tried to mentor him when he could. Everything changed when the sensors started screaming. Lucy's face went pale as she stared at her displays. Her hands moved quickly across the controls, checking and rechecking what she was seeing. Cole moved to stand behind her, looking at the data that made no sense. Gravitational anomalies were appearing at the edge of the system, massive distortions in space that shouldn't exist naturally. The sensors showed something emerging from what looked like an artificial wormhole, something so big that the computer struggled to calculate its size. Ships. Hundreds of them. No, not hundreds. The count kept climbing as more emerged from the wormhole. 200, 500, 800. Lucy's voice shook as she reported the final number. 1,000 warships had just entered the Kelton's Gate system. Cole felt his stomach drop. This was impossible. No one had fleets that large, not even Earth. These ships were alien, their designs unlike anything in human databases. The computer analyzed their energy signatures and weapon systems, and every result came back the same. These ships were more advanced than anything humanity had built, larger and more powerful by significant margins. Kyle was already trying to hail the alien fleet, sending standard first contact messages in every language humanity knew. The response came quickly, but it was not friendly. A massive face appeared on the main screen, reptilian and cold, with eyes that held nothing but contempt. The alien identified itself as War Master Dracoth of the Korthian Empire. His voice was deep and harsh, translated by the ship's computer. He informed them that this system now belonged to the Korthians, and all human presence would be eliminated. The mining colony would be destroyed, and the Defiant had one chance to leave or die. Cole asked for time to evacuate the civilians. Dracoth laughed, a sound that made everyone on the bridge flinch. He said the Korthians did not negotiate with inferior species, and gave the Defiant 1 hour to leave the system. The channel closed. The bridge was silent except for the quiet beeping of the sensors as they tracked the massive fleet, moving slowly but steadily toward the colony. Kyle checked the communications and confirmed what Cole already knew. The nearest human fleet was 6 weeks away, Even their fastest message would take 3 weeks to reach Earth Command, and another 3 weeks for any ships to arrive. The 40,000 people on Kelton's Gate could not be evacuated in time, not even close. Lucy ran the calculations. The few civilian transports at the colony could maybe save 5,000 people if they started loading immediately. That left 35,000 with no hope of escape. The Defiant could run, jump to faster than light speed, and escape the system within minutes. The crew would live. The colonists would die. Cole called his senior officers to the ready room. Hayes came up from engineering, wiping grease from his hands. Helen left her patients to join them. They sat around the small table and Cole laid out the situation without softening it. They were one small frigate against 1,000 warships. They had no chance of winning. But if they stayed and fought, they could buy time for some civilians to escape. He expected his officers to argue, to suggest retreat, or try to find another option. Instead, Lucy spoke first. She said she was staying. Hayes nodded and said his engines would run until they exploded if that's what it took. Helen simply said that her place was with the wounded wherever they were. Kyle, listening from the bridge, sent a message saying he wasn't leaving either. Cole realized then that his crew had already made their choice. He went back to the bridge and opened a ship-wide channel. His voice was steady as he explained the situation to all 85 crew members. He told them the truth about their chances and gave them a choice. Anyone who wanted to take the shuttle to the colony and try to escape on the civilian transports could go. No one would think less of them. He waited. The ship was silent. Not a single person moved toward the shuttle bay. Cole felt something swell in his chest, pride mixed with sorrow. These people were choosing to stay knowing they would probably die. They were choosing duty over survival, strangers over themselves. He cleared his throat and gave his orders. Hayes would maximize weapons and shields. Lucy would prepare every tactical advantage she could find. Kyle would coordinate with the colony evacuation. Helen would prepare the medical bay for casualties. The Defiant turned to face the approaching fleet. One small frigate against 1,000 warships. The crew knew they couldn't win, but they also knew they didn't have to win. They just had to hold the line long enough for some of those colonists to escape. Cole sat in his captain's chair and watched the enemy fleet grow larger on the sensors. He opened a channel to Dracoth and spoke clearly. "This is human space and you are not welcome here." The War Master's laughter echoed through the bridge, but Cole had already closed the channel. He looked at his crew, saw their determined faces, and felt grateful to serve with them. The battle would begin soon and most of them would not survive it. But they would make the Korthians remember this day. They would make them pay for every mile of space, for every minute of time. The Defiant might fall, but she would not yield. The countdown began. 48 hours until the Korthian fleet reached firing range. 48 hours to prepare for the impossible. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of desperate preparation. Every crew member on the Defiant worked without stopping, driven by the knowledge that thousands of lives depended on what they did in these precious hours. Sleep became a luxury no one could afford, and meals were eaten at workstations between tasks. Peter Hayes turned the engine room into organized chaos. He had his team strip every non-essential system from the ship, pulling out equipment and rerouting power to weapons and shields. The crew quarters lost their heating. The recreation areas went dark, and even the captain's ready room was stripped of its computer systems. Hayes took apart the shuttle's power core and integrated it into the main reactor, a modification that would have gotten him court-martialed under normal circumstances. He pushed the reactor to 130% capacity, knowing it could explode at any moment, but also knowing they needed every bit of power they could generate. Lucy Grant barely left the tactical station. She ran simulation after simulation, studying the Korthian fleet formation and searching for any weakness she could exploit. The aliens moved in perfect geometric patterns, their 1,000 ships arranged in precise formations that suggested heavy reliance on centralized commands. If she could disrupt their communications even briefly, it might create confusion. She programmed new attack patterns into the weapon systems, strategies that relied on speed and unpredictability rather than firepower. The Defiant couldn't match the Korthians in strength, but maybe they could match them in cunning. Kyle Bennett established a continuous link with the colony below. The evacuation was chaos as 40,000 people tried to board ships that could hold only a fraction of that number. Families were torn apart as parents put children on transports, knowing they might never see them again. The colony administrator was trying to maintain order, but panic was spreading. Kyle coordinated with the transport captains, helping them plot escape routes that would take them away from the Korthian fleet. He made sure the children went first, then the elderly and sick. It was an impossible choice about who deserved to live and who would be left behind. Helen Park prepared the medical bay for the wounded she knew were coming. She organized supplies, set up additional cots in the corridors, and created triage protocols for mass casualties. She also took time to visit each crew member personally, checking on their physical and mental state. Many were scared but trying to hide it. She offered comfort where she could and made sure everyone knew they were not alone in their fear. Captain Cole barely slept. He reviewed Lucy's tactical plans, approved Hayes's dangerous modifications, and monitored the evacuation progress. He also spent time walking through the ship, talking to his crew. He wanted them to know he saw them, that he appreciated their sacrifice. Some were veterans like Hayes who had made peace with death long ago. Others were young like Kyle, facing mortality for the first time. Cole didn't offer false hope or empty platitudes. He simply thanked them and told them their families would know what they did here. The Korthian fleet maintained its steady advance, moving like a slow, inevitable wave toward the colony. Dracoth sent another message demanding surrender. Cole didn't bother responding. There was nothing left to say. When the Korthians finally entered weapons range, Cole had positioned the Defiant in the system's massive asteroid belt. The rocks would provide cover and limit the enemy's ability to surround them. It was time to see if preparation and courage could overcome impossible odds. The first shots came from extreme range. Korthian destroyers fired particle beams that lit up the darkness of space. Lucy had predicted this, and the Defiant was already moving, darting between asteroids as the beams carved through empty space where they had been moments before. The ship's modified engines screamed as Hayes pushed them beyond their limits, but they responded with speed the Korthians hadn't expected. Lucy returned fire with precision. She didn't waste shots trying to damage the heavily shielded warships. Instead, she targeted their sensor arrays and communication dishes, the vulnerable external systems that kept the fleet coordinated. Her first volley destroyed the sensors on 3 Korthian destroyers, leaving them blind and confused. Her second volley caught them as they tried to reposition, punching through weakened shields and rupturing their hulls. 3 massive warships exploded in brilliant fireballs. The Korthian fleet hesitated, surprised by the ferocity and accuracy of the small frigate's attack. That moment of hesitation was exactly what Lucy had counted on. The Defiant emerged from behind a large asteroid moving at full speed, all weapons firing. 2 more destroyers died before they could react. The frigate then dove back into the asteroid field, using the rocks as shields against the return fire that tore through space. Dracoth's voice came over the channel, no longer amused. He sounded angry that this primitive ship had destroyed 5 of his vessels. He ordered 50 ships to pursue the Defiant into the asteroid field and crush it. Lucy smiled grimly as she watched the enemy ships enter the belt. This was exactly what she wanted. The Korthians were built for open space battles where their superior firepower could be brought to bear. In the tight confines of the asteroid field, their size became a disadvantage. They had to slow down to avoid collisions while the smaller Defiant darted between rocks at high speed. Lucy used every trick she knew, leading the pursuers into traps where asteroids blocked their escape routes and their own ships got in each other's way. The battle became a deadly game of cat and mouse. The Defiant would appear, fire a devastating volley, and disappear before the Korthians could respond. Sometimes Lucy used the asteroids themselves as weapons, shooting out their support so they crashed into enemy ships. Sometimes she positioned the Defiant so enemy fire would hit other enemy ships if they missed. 3 more Korthian vessels were destroyed in the chaotic fighting, but the Defiant was taking damage too. A lucky shot from a Korthian cruiser penetrated the weakened shields and tore through the portside hull. Deck 3 suffered an explosive decompression that killed 6 crew members instantly. 3 more died on Deck 4 when a plasma conduit ruptured. The port weapons array was completely destroyed, reducing the frigate's firepower by a third. Helen worked frantically in the medical bay as wounded crew members were brought in. Burns, broken bones, and decompression injuries filled every bed. She moved from patient to patient, stabilizing the critical cases and comforting the dying. One young engineer named Carla died holding Helen's hand, asking if they had saved anyone yet. Helen told her yes, they had saved thousands. It was true. The colony transports had been fleeing for hours now, and many were already beyond the Korthian fleet's reach. Hayes reported that the reactor was holding, but barely. The modifications were working, but the strain was enormous. He gave them maybe 6 more hours before catastrophic failure. The shields were down to 40% and falling. Life support was failing on the damaged decks. The Defiant was dying by inches, but she was still fighting. Cole watched the tactical display and felt a strange calm settle over him. They had been fighting for 16 hours now and had destroyed 10 enemy ships with dozens more damaged. The colonists were escaping. His crew was doing the impossible. He opened the ship-wide channel and his voice was steady despite his exhaustion. "We are holding the line and people are living because of what you are doing right now. So continue the fight because every minute matters." The crew responded not with words but with action, and weapons fire intensified as they poured everything they had into the battle. The Korthians had learned to fear the small human ship, but they kept coming because Dracoth's pride demanded victory. 50 ships had entered the asteroid field, and now only 37 remained operational. But those 37 were closing in, and the Defiant was running out of space to maneuver. Lucy calculated their options and found none that led to survival. She looked at Cole and he nodded. They both knew what came next. The Defiant would have to leave the asteroid belt and face the enemy in open space. It would be a death sentence, but it would buy more time. The frigate emerged from the asteroids like a wounded animal leaving its den. The Korthian fleet was waiting. The Defiant hung in open space, exposed and vulnerable. 973 Korthian warships surrounded her in a vast sphere, their weapons trained on the small frigate that had cost them so much. On the bridge, Cole watched the tactical display and knew this was the moment they had been fighting toward. There was no escape now, no clever tactics left to try. This was the end. Lucy's fingers moved across her console, checking weapon status. The starboard batteries were still operational, but ammunition was running low. The missile tubes had 6 shots remaining. The main cannon could fire maybe a dozen more times before its power cells depleted. She had made every shot count so far, and she would make these last ones count too. Hayes called from engineering with a report that made Cole's chest tighten. The reactor had maybe 4 hours left before it went critical. When it failed, the explosion would tear the ship apart and likely take any nearby enemy vessels with it. Hayes suggested they could steer toward the densest part of the Korthian formation and maximize the damage. His voice was matter-of-fact, as if discussing routine maintenance rather than their deaths. Helen had 32 dead crew members now and 19 wounded. She had moved the medical bay to a more protected section of the ship after the earlier hull breaches. Some of the wounded insisted on returning to their stations despite their injuries. A gunner named Paul had lost his left arm but was back at his post, operating his weapons with his remaining hand. Helen had argued with him, but Paul said he didn't come this far to sit in a bed while others fought. Kyle monitored the colony evacuation, and his reports brought the only good news. 70% of the transports had escaped beyond the Korthian fleet's range. 38,000 people were going to live because the Defiant had bought them time. 2,000 were still on the colony, waiting for the last transports to load. Every additional hour the frigate survived meant more families reunited, more children growing up, more lives continuing. Dracoth opened a channel, and his reptilian face filled the main screen. The War Master looked tired and angry. He spoke without his earlier mockery. The Korthian Empire had conquered 47 species across 200 systems. They had destroyed fleets of hundreds of ships. Never in their history had a single vessel cost them this much. 27 warships destroyed, 63 damaged, thousands of warriors dead, all because of one obsolete human frigate. The War Master made an offer that surprised everyone on the bridge. If Cole surrendered now, Dracoth would allow the remaining colonists to evacuate. No one would be harmed. The Korthians would wait for the transports to leave before occupying the system. It was a genuine offer, and Cole could hear the desperation behind it. Dracoth needed this humiliation to end. Cole looked at his crew. Lucy met his eyes and shook her head slightly. Hayes was listening from engineering, and his voice came over the intercom saying no deal. Helen checked in from medical saying the wounded voted to keep fighting. Kyle polled the rest of the crew and the response was unanimous. They had come too far to surrender now. Cole understood their reasoning even though part of him wanted to accept and save the lives of his remaining crew. If they surrendered, the Korthians would learn that humans could be broken. Every future encounter would start with the aliens knowing that humans would eventually yield. But if the Defiant fought to the absolute end, the Corthians would think twice before attacking human space again. This wasn't just about saving colonists anymore. This was about sending a message that would echo across the galaxy. He looked at Dracoth and spoke clearly. "The offer is rejected and we will fight until our last breath." Dracoth's face twisted in fury and the channel closed. Within seconds, the Corthian fleet opened fire. The space around the Defiant exploded with energy weapons and missiles. Lucy activated every defensive system still functioning, routing all power to shields. The small frigate shuddered as impacts hammered against the failing barriers. Hayes pushed the reactor even harder, giving Lucy the power she needed. The shields held for precious seconds, deflecting shots that should have destroyed them instantly. Lucy fired back with everything she had. Her targeting was flawless and born from 16 hours of continuous combat. Every shot hit critical systems and weakened armor. 3 Corthian destroyers suffered reactor breaches and exploded. 2 cruisers lost their engines and began drifting helplessly. A carrier's hangar bay detonated, killing hundreds of fighters before they could launch. The Corthians adjusted their formation, pulling back slightly and concentrating fire from multiple angles. The Defiant's shields collapsed under the assault. Direct hits tore through the hull, ripping apart sections of the ship that had survived until now. The starboard weapons array exploded, killing its entire crew. Engineering took a direct hit that sent Hayes flying into a bulkhead. He got up bleeding from a head wound and kept working. Cole felt the ship dying beneath him. Alarms screamed from every station and damage reports flooded in faster than anyone could read them. Deck after deck went dark as power failed. Life support was gone on 6 levels. The bridge itself suffered a hit that blew out the main view screen and sent shrapnel flying. Kyle took a metal fragment in his shoulder but stayed at his station, his blood floating in the sudden zero gravity. Lucy's console exploded in a shower of sparks and she screamed as flames engulfed her face and hands. Helen appeared seconds later, spraying fire suppressant and pulling Lucy back from the ruined station. Half of Lucy's face was burned, her hair gone, her hands blistered. Helen tried to take her to medical, but Lucy refused. She crawled to a secondary tactical station and kept fighting with burned fingers that could barely grip the controls. Through the chaos, Cole saw that they had destroyed 9 more Corthian ships in this final exchange. 36 total. It wasn't enough to stop the fleet, but it was enough to matter. He also saw that the Defiant had maybe minutes left. The reactor was screaming toward critical failure and the ship's structure was compromised beyond repair. He made his decision and gave the order that everyone knew was coming. All remaining crew to escape pods immediately. Lucy protested, but Cole ordered her to go. She had done everything possible and deserved a chance to live. Hayes argued from engineering, but Cole pulled rank. The captain's voice was firm as he commanded them to evacuate. 16 crew members made it to the pods, including Helen, who had to be physically dragged away from her patients. She went only after Cole promised that the wounded who couldn't move would not die alone. He would stay with them. Lucy was one of the last to leave, carried by 2 crew members as she struggled against them. Her burned face was streaming tears as she screamed at Cole not to do this. He told her she was the finest tactical officer he had ever served with, and she needed to survive to teach others what she had learned here. The pod doors closed on her protests. Hayes refused to leave engineering. He said his place was with his engines and no one could make him abandon them. Kyle stayed on the bridge, saying someone needed to help Cole steer the dying ship. 3 others remained at their posts, 2 wounded to reach the escape pods but still conscious enough to man their stations. Cole sat in his captain's chair and looked at the faces of the 8 crew members who would die with him. He felt honored to have their company in these final moments. Hayes had set the reactor to overload in 3 minutes. Kyle plotted a course toward the center of the Corthian formation. The gunners prepared their last shots. The escape pods launched small bright dots fleeing the dying frigate. The Corthians let them go, focused entirely on finishing the Defiant. Dracoth probably thought he had won because the ship was clearly finished. He didn't understand that losing could also be victory. Cole opened a final transmission on all frequencies. His voice was calm and proud. "Tell Earth to tell them we held the line and tell them humanity does not yield." Then he gave the order and the Defiant, more corpse than ship, began her last journey into the heart of the enemy fleet. The escape pods drifted through the debris field, their small engines too weak to carry them far from the battle. Inside the cramped metal spheres, 16 survivors watched through tiny viewports as the Defiant made her final run. Lucy pressed her burned face against the cold glass, tears streaming down her damaged cheeks. She had failed her captain and her ship, and now she could only witness the end. The Defiant accelerated toward the Corthian formation, her battered hull trailing atmosphere and debris. The aliens continued firing, pouring everything they had into the approaching frigate. Explosions rippled across her surface, tearing away armor plating and exposing internal structures. She should have disintegrated under that assault, but somehow she kept coming, held together by nothing but the will of the 8 souls still aboard. On the bridge, Cole gripped his chair as the ship bucked and shuddered around him. The viewscreen was gone, replaced by a jagged hole that opened to space. He wore an emergency suit now, as did Kyle and the others who remained. The young ensign sat at his station, his wounded shoulder forgotten as he maintained their course. His hands were steady, even though his face was pale with fear and pain. Hayes worked in engineering, surrounded by failing systems and warning lights that painted everything red. The reactor was 60 seconds from critical overload. He had disabled every safety system and removed every failsafe. When it went, it would be spectacular. He thought about his ex-wife back on Earth and his daughter who had joined the Merchant Marines. He hoped they would be proud of what he did here. He hoped they would understand why he couldn't leave. The gunners fired their last shots as the Defiant plunged into the Corthian formation. Their aim was perfect even now, even with the ship falling apart around them. 2 more enemy destroyers died, their reactors breaching in twin explosions. The Corthians tried to scatter, but they were packed too tightly, their perfect formation now a trap. Cole saw it all through the hole in the bridge. The massive Corthian ships loomed around them, so close he could see the alien warriors through their viewports. Some looked afraid. They should be. They had learned too late that humanity didn't surrender and didn't break. They had learned that sometimes the smallest ship could carry the biggest heart. 30 seconds. Hayes watched the reactor readings climb past any safe limit. The core was white-hot and the containment fields were failing. He thought about all the ships he had served on, all the engines he had coaxed back to life. This would be his masterpiece, his final gift to the Defiant. Let her go out like a warrior, taking her enemies with her. 20 seconds. Kyle sent one last transmission, his voice surprisingly calm. "This is Ensign Kyle Bennett of the Human Stellar Navy, and we held the line." He hoped someone would hear it. Hoped Earth would know what happened here. The message repeated automatically as he turned to look at Cole. The captain met his eyes and nodded. Kyle nodded back. There were no words needed between them. They had served together, fought together, and now they would die together. It was enough. 10 seconds. The remaining crew members braced for impact. A gunner named Lisa whispered a prayer. An engineer named Jack thought about his parents. A medic named Frank regretted never telling the girl back home how he felt. But none of them regretted being here. They had chosen this. They had chosen duty and sacrifice over survival. That choice defined them. 5 seconds. Cole thought about his crew, all 85 of them. The 69 who had already died and the 16 in the escape pods. He hoped they would be remembered. He hoped their sacrifice would mean something. He hoped humanity would learn from this and become stronger. The reactor went critical. The explosion started small, deep in the Defiant's core where the reactor had held together far longer than it should have. Then it expanded in a microsecond, a sphere of pure energy that vaporized everything it touched. The ship came apart in a brilliant flash that outshone the system's sun. The blast wave spread outward at relativistic speeds, a wall of destruction that caught the Corthian ships before they could react. 37 warships simply ceased to exist, torn apart by forces that overwhelmed their shields and armor. 20 more were crippled, their hulls breached and systems destroyed. The shockwave continued outward, damaging ships at the edges of the formation and sending them tumbling out of control. From the escape pods, the survivors watched in stunned silence. The explosion was beautiful and terrible, a miniature star that consumed their ship and their friends. Lucy sobbed openly, her burned hands pressed against the viewport. Helen held a wounded engineer who cried for the medics they had left behind. A veteran sergeant named Danny simply stared, his face expressionless, too numb to process what he was seeing. The Corthian fleet broke. For the first time in their history, they retreated from a battle they were winning. Dracoth screamed orders to regroup, but his commanders ignored him. They had watched a single frigate destroy or cripple over 100 ships. They had seen crew members choose death over surrender. The psychological impact was devastating. These humans fought like demons and died like martyrs. The Corthians wanted no more of this cursed system. The massive fleet began jumping to faster than light speed, fleeing back to their own territory. Within an hour, Kelton's gate was empty except for debris. Damaged hulks and 16 small escape pods containing the only survivors of the HSS Defiant. The pods drifted for 3 days before a human patrol ship picked them up. The captain of the rescue vessel had received the Defiant's final transmissions and had rushed to the system expecting to find it conquered. Instead, he found a graveyard of alien ships and 16 people who had witnessed the impossible. Lucy was the first to be brought aboard the rescue ship. Her burns were treated and she was given sedatives, but she refused to sleep. She insisted on giving her report immediately, describing every detail of the battle while it was fresh in her mind. Her voice was hoarse and her hands shook, but she was thorough. The tactical data needed to be recorded. Other crews needed to learn from what the Defiant had done. Hayes was found unconscious in his pod, suffering from a severe concussion and internal injuries. He had stayed at his station until the last possible moment, ejecting only seconds before the reactor breach. The doctors said he was lucky to be alive. When he woke up, he asked about his engines and had to be reminded that the Defiant was gone. Helen had kept the wounded alive in the pods using limited medical supplies and sheer determination. She had performed emergency surgery on 2 crew members using tools meant for basic first aid. Both survived because of her skill. She finally collapsed from exhaustion after everyone was safely aboard the rescue ship. Kyle was quiet and withdrawn, speaking only when directly questioned. The young ensign who had been so eager and enthusiastic was gone, replaced by someone who had looked death in the face and watched his friends die. He would carry survivor's guilt for years, wondering why he lived when so many others didn't. The rescue ship's captain reviewed the sensor logs and couldn't believe what they showed. One frigate had held off 1,000 warships for nearly 20 hours, destroying 36 and damaging over 80 more before finally falling. The casualty ratio was unprecedented. The tactical brilliance was stunning. The courage was beyond comprehension. He sent an immediate report to Earth Command, marking it highest priority. Within hours, every human outpost in the sector had heard the story. Within days, it spread across all 17 colonies. Within weeks, it reached Earth itself, and the whole planet stopped to listen. The Defiant had become legend. 3 weeks after the battle, Earth Command's relief fleet arrived in Kelton's Gate expecting to find ruins and graves. Instead, they found a functioning colony and a debris field that told an incredible story. Admiral Patricia Stone stood on the bridge of her flagship and stared at the sensor data that cataloged the wreckage of over 100 Corthian warships. Her tactical officers had analyzed the battle pattern and confirmed what seemed impossible. One frigate had done this. The 16 survivors were transferred to the flagship for debriefing. Lucy Grant, her face still bandaged from burns that would scar for life, walked Admiral Stone through every tactical decision. Her memory was perfect despite her trauma, and her analysis was brilliant. Stone listened in amazement as Lucy described how they had turned weaknesses into advantages and used the enemy's own strength against them. The Admiral immediately ordered Lucy's tactical data distributed to every ship in the fleet. This was doctrine that needed to be taught. Peter Hayes was still recovering from his injuries but insisted on inspecting the wreckage of the Defiant's reactor core that had been retrieved from the debris field. He wanted to see if his modifications had performed as expected. The blast pattern confirmed his calculations had been perfect. The reactor had held exactly as long as he needed and released its energy in precisely the right direction. He felt proud despite his grief. His engines had given everything and taken a lot of enemies down with them. Helen Park spent her time with the other survivors, helping them process their trauma. Many were struggling with survivors' guilt, wondering why they lived when 69 others died. She helped them understand that their survival wasn't random or undeserved. Cole had ordered them to the escape pods because someone needed to survive to tell the story. Their duty now was to honor the fallen by living fully and ensuring their sacrifice was remembered. Kyle Bennett was the youngest survivor at 22, and he struggled the most. He had nightmares about the explosion, about watching the ship die with 8 crew members still aboard. Helen worked with him daily, helping him see that Cole's final order had been about hope. The captain wanted some of them to live, to carry on, to show the galaxy that humanity endured. Admiral Stone organized a memorial service at Kelton's Gate. The entire colony attended, 38,000 people who owed their lives to the Defiant's crew. They gathered at the exact orbital coordinates where the ship had made its final stand. A monument was constructed there, a simple metal pillar with 69 names engraved on its surface. Captain Andrew Cole's name was at the top, followed by Lucy's tactical team, Hayes's engineers, Helen's medical staff, and every other soul who had fought and died. Helen gave the main eulogy. She stood before the crowd still wearing her uniform and spoke without notes. She talked about the crew not as heroes but as people, scared and hurting but determined. She described Hayes cursing at his engines even as they failed, Lucy working with burned hands that could barely grip her controls, Cole staying calm even when the bridge was torn open to space. She talked about the jokes they told to keep spirits up, the tears they shed for fallen friends, the messages they recorded for families they would never see again. Her voice broke when she talked about the 8 who stayed to the end. They were not superhuman or fearless. They were simply people who believed that some things mattered more than survival. They chose duty over life, strangers over themselves, and that choice changed everything. The colony administrator spoke next, describing how the evacuation had been chaos until the Defiant stand gave them time to organize. Without those 20 hours of fighting, maybe 5,000 would have escaped. Instead, 38,000 lived. Every child in the colony, every elderly person, every family was intact because 85 warriors held the line. Peter Hayes was asked to speak, but he declined, saying he wasn't good with words. Instead, he presented the colony with a piece of the Defiant's hull plating that had been recovered. It was mounted on a stand with a plaque that read "She held the line." The colony placed it in the center of their main plaza where everyone would see it daily and remember. The impact of the Defiant stand rippled across human space. Military recruitment increased by 500% as young people wanted to serve like the crew who had become legends. 17 new frigates were commissioned and each was named after a fallen crew member. The first was the HSS Andrew Cole, a state-of-the-art vessel that incorporated every lesson learned from the battle. The Naval Academy made the Kelton's Gate battle required study for all tactical courses. Lucy's strategies were analyzed and adapted, forming the basis for new doctrine on asymmetric warfare. Cole's decision to use terrain and mobility over firepower became standard training for frigate commanders. Every officer learned about the 8-minute reactor overload and how Hayes had turned a failing system into a weapon. But the story's impact extended beyond humanity. Other species heard what happened and reactions varied. Some were inspired by the courage displayed and reached out to establish diplomatic relations with humanity. They saw potential allies who understood sacrifice and honor. Other species became cautious, realizing that humans were more dangerous than they appeared. A civilization willing to die rather than yield was not one to be underestimated. The Korthian Empire faced internal crisis. Warmaster Dracoth was stripped of command and exiled for his failure. The High Council debated what to do about humanity. Some demanded total war to avenge their losses and restore their reputation. Others argued for caution, pointing out that one human frigate had cost them more ships than entire fleet actions against other species. The debate raged for months before they reached a decision. They would avoid human space entirely and focus on securing their existing territory. That decision proved wise because 3 species previously conquered by the Korthians launched rebellions, inspired by the Defiant's example. If 85 humans could stand against impossible odds, perhaps they could too. The Korthian Empire suddenly faced resistance on multiple fronts, and their image of invincibility was shattered. 10 years later, Admiral Helen Park stood on the bridge of a new ship. She had risen through the ranks, her experience at Kelton's Gate making her invaluable to fleet command. Now she was about to christen the most advanced battlecruiser humanity had ever built. The HSS Defiant II was 10 times the size of the original, bristling with weapons and protected by shields that could withstand anything the Korthians threw at it. Her first officer was Commander Kyle Bennett, no longer the scared young ensign but a confident veteran. The ceremony was held at Kelton's Gate, now a thriving system with a population of 80,000. The old monument still floated in orbit, maintained carefully as a sacred site. The new Defiant passed slowly by, performing a traditional naval salute. Every crew member stood at attention, honoring the ship and crew that made their service possible. Helen stood on the bridge and looked at the monument through the viewport. She thought about Cole and his steady voice, Hayes and his impossible engines, Lucy and her brilliant tactics. She thought about the 8 who stayed to the end and the 61 who died in the fighting. She whispered words only she could hear. "We held the line, Captain, and we are still holding it." The new Defiant moved away from the monument, joining a fleet of 300 human warships that now patrolled the frontier. The fleet existed because 85 people refused to yield when 1,000 warships advanced. They had shown the galaxy that humanity would not be intimidated or conquered. They had paid a terrible price, but their sacrifice had bought something precious. Time for humanity to grow stronger, allies to recognize their worth, and enemies to think twice before attacking. The story of the Defiant was told in every human school, passed down through generations. Children learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. They learned that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when they stood together. They learned that sometimes the greatest victories came from those who fought, knowing they could not win but fought anyway because it was right. And somewhere in the cold depths of space, floating among the stars, a simple monument bore 69 names. Each name represented a life given freely for others. Each name was a reminder that humanity's greatest strength was not its weapons or technology, but its willingness to sacrifice for those who could not defend themselves. The monument would float there for centuries, an eternal testament to the day when one frigate held the line against impossible odds and changed the course of history.